Listen to me carefully. What I'm about to tell you will give you chills. Right now, as I speak these words, something extraordinary is happening in Jerusalem. The sky above the holy city is displaying signs that haven't been seen for generations. And early this morning, at the break of dawn, witnesses reported seeing figures entering through the ancient gates of Jerusalem. This isn't fiction. This isn't speculation. This is happening right now. Have you been paying attention to what's unfolding in Israel? Because what we're witnessing today isn't just another news story. It's the fulfillment of prophecies that were written thousands of years ago. The same prophecies that foretold the return of the Jewish people to their homeland. The same prophecies that spoke of Jerusalem becoming the center of world attention in the last days. I need you to understand something. Every single event happening in Jerusalem right now has eternal significance. Every political decision. Every military movement. Every spiritual awakening. It's all connected to a divine timeline that was set in motion before the foundation of the world. And you and I are living witnesses to these final chapters of human history. The prophet Daniel spoke of a time when knowledge would increase and many would run to and fro. Look around you. We're living in that time. But Daniel also spoke of something else. He spoke of the last days when the sanctuary would be established and the daily sacrifice would be restored. Friends, that time is now approaching faster than most people realize. This morning, as the sun rose over the Mount of Olives, something unprecedented happened. Local residents began reporting strange phenomena in the sky above Jerusalem. Not just clouds. Not just weather patterns. But formations that seemed to move with purpose. With intention. Witnesses described seeing what appeared to be angelic beings moving through the heavens above the holy city. Can you imagine the sound? The absolute silence that fell over Jerusalem as people looked up and saw the heavens opening? Children stopped playing. Traffic came to a standstill. Even the birds seemed to pause their morning songs. It was as if heaven itself was making an announcement to the earth below. But here's what gave me chills when I heard this report. At exactly the same time these heavenly signs appeared, a group of mysterious figures was seen entering Jerusalem through the Eastern Gate. Now, you need to understand something about the Eastern Gate. It's been sealed for centuries. Sealed by Ottoman rulers who feared the prophecy that the Messiah would enter Jerusalem through this very gate. Yet somehow, witnesses reported seeing figures walking through this area at dawn. Not around it. Not over it. Through it. As if the ancient stones themselves had become transparent to allow their passage. Local authorities are baffled. Security cameras show nothing unusual. Yet dozens of witnesses all report the same thing. Do you realize what this means? Jesus himself prophesied that he would return to Jerusalem. He told his disciples that they would see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with power and great glory. And the prophet Zechariah wrote that his feet would touch the Mount of Olives, splitting it in two from east to west. The question that's burning in my heart right now is this: are we witnessing the preliminary signs of Christ's return? Are these mysterious figures the two witnesses prophesied in Revelation chapter 11? The ones who would appear in Jerusalem during the final days to testify to the world? Listen to what Revelation tells us. And I will give power to my two witnesses, and they will prophesy 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. The text goes on to say that these witnesses would have power to shut heaven so that no rain falls during their ministry. They would have power to turn water into blood and to strike the earth with plagues. Right now, as meteorologists struggle to explain the atmospheric anomalies over Jerusalem, I can't help but wonder if we're seeing the beginning of their ministry. The sky isn't just scary, as our title suggests. It's prophetic. It's announcing something that will shake the foundations of this world. But here's what you need to understand about the Jewish perspective on these events. For nearly 2,000 years, the Jewish people have been praying for the restoration of the temple. They've been preparing, training priests, crafting sacred vessels, breeding red heifers according to biblical specifications. Everything necessary for temple worship has been prepared and is waiting. The Temple Institute in Jerusalem has recreated every single item needed for temple service. The golden menorah, the table of showbread, the altar of incense. Even the high priest's breastplate with its 12 precious stones representing the 12 tribes of Israel. All of this isn't coincidence. It's preparation for a prophetic moment that's rapidly approaching. And now, with these mysterious dawn visitors and the heavenly signs appearing simultaneously, we might be witnessing the beginning of the final countdown. The book of Daniel speaks of the 70th week, the final 7 years before Messiah's kingdom is established. During this time, the temple would be rebuilt and sacrifices would resume. Think about this for a moment. What if those figures entering Jerusalem at dawn weren't just random visitors? What if they were divine messengers sent to prepare the way for the most significant prophetic fulfillment in human history? What if God is positioning his pieces on the chessboard of human events for the final move? I need you to really consider what's happening here. The nation of Israel was reborn in 1948 after nearly 2,000 years. Jerusalem came back under Jewish control in 1967. The Hebrew language was revived from the dead. Jews from over 100 nations have returned to their ancestral homeland. These weren't accidents. These were prophetic fulfillments that set the stage for everything we're witnessing today. But the most incredible part isn't just what's happening in Israel. It's what's happening in the hearts of Jewish people around the world. Rabbis who have studied the ancient texts are beginning to speak openly about the coming of Messiah. Some are even suggesting that the Messiah's arrival is imminent. What they don't yet fully understand is that their Messiah and our Jesus are the same person. The one they'd been waiting for is the one who walked their streets 2,000 years ago. The one who taught in their temple. The one who died on their cross and rose from their tomb. And here's where it gets personal for you and me. Jesus told his followers to watch for the signs of his return. He said when we see these things beginning to happen, we should look up because our redemption is drawing near. He didn't tell us to look up next year or next decade. He said when we see these things beginning to happen. Are you watching? Are you prepared? Because what's happening in Jerusalem right now isn't just about Israel. It's about the entire world. It's about you. It's about your family. It's about your eternal destiny. The mysterious figures who entered the holy city at dawn didn't come just for Israel. They came as a sign to the entire world that God's prophetic timeline is moving forward. That the kingdom of heaven is breaking into human history. That the return of Jesus Christ is no longer a distant hope but an approaching reality. I want you to imagine something with me. Imagine you're standing on the Mount of Olives this morning, looking west toward the Golden Dome and the ancient walls of Jerusalem. The sun is just breaking over the horizon, painting the limestone walls with golden light. Suddenly, the sky begins to change. Not with clouds, but with something you've never seen before. There's a sound. Not quite thunder. Not quite wind. But a sound that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. A sound that makes your heart race and your spirit leap. Because somewhere deep inside, you recognize it. It's the sound of heaven touching earth. And then you see them. Figures moving with purpose and authority through the dawn light. Not walking like ordinary men, but moving like beings who exist in dimensions beyond our physical reality. They're entering the city through gates that have been sealed for centuries. Yet somehow, their passage is unhindered. This is what witnesses reported seeing this very morning. This isn't imagination. This isn't wishful thinking. This is testimony from people who were there. People who saw with their own eyes what prophets wrote about thousands of years ago. But here's what concerns me, and I pray it concerns you too. Most of the world isn't paying attention. Most people are so caught up in their daily routines, their problems, their distractions, that they're missing the most significant prophetic events in human history unfolding right before their eyes. Jesus warned us about this. He said that in the last days, it would be like the days of Noah. People would be eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, completely unaware that judgment was approaching. They would be caught completely off guard when the end comes. Don't let that be you. Don't let that be your family. Because what's happening in Jerusalem today is just the beginning. The book of Revelation tells us about events that will shake this world to its very core. Wars and rumors of wars. Famines and earthquakes. Signs in the sun, moon, and stars. and ultimately, the return of Jesus Christ in glory and power. The question isn't whether these events will happen. The question is whether you'll be ready when they do. Are you living your life in light of eternity? Are you sharing the gospel with your loved ones? Are you storing up treasures in heaven rather than on earth? Because I'll tell you something that gives me hope in the midst of all these earth-shaking events. God is not caught off guard by anything happening in our world today. He's not panicking in heaven because of political chaos or economic uncertainty or social upheaval. He's been orchestrating human history according to His perfect plan since the beginning of time. And His plan includes you. It includes your salvation. It includes your transformation. It includes your eternal destiny in His kingdom. But that plan requires your response. It requires your faith. It requires your surrender to Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. The mysterious visitors who entered Jerusalem at dawn didn't come to condemn the world. They came as messengers of hope. As harbingers of the kingdom that is coming. As witnesses to the truth that God's love for humanity is so great that He will not leave us without clear signs of His approaching intervention in human history. So what should you do with this information? How should you respond to what you've learned today? First, don't dismiss it as coincidence. Don't explain away the supernatural with natural explanations. Recognize that we're living in prophetic times that demand prophetic responses. Second, examine your heart. Are you ready to meet Jesus face to face? Have you surrendered your life to Him completely? Are you living each day as if it could be your last on earth and your first in eternity? Third, share this message. Tell your family about what's happening in Jerusalem. Warn your friends that we're living in the last days. Not to create fear, but to create urgency. Not to promote panic, but to promote preparation. As I bring this first part of our journey together to a close, I want to leave you with this thought. The sky over Jerusalem isn't scary because God is angry. It's awesome because God is moving. The mysterious figures entering the holy city at dawn aren't harbingers of doom. They're messengers of hope for everyone who has placed their trust in Jesus Christ. The final act of human history is beginning to unfold. The curtain is rising on the greatest drama ever staged. And you have a front row seat to watch prophecy become reality. But more than that, you have an invitation to participate in God's eternal kingdom. Don't waste this moment. Don't miss this opportunity. Because what's happening in Jerusalem today is just the beginning of what God has planned for those who love Him. The best is yet to come. But first, the world must witness the completion of His prophetic timeline. And that timeline has just accelerated in ways that should make every believer's heart race with anticipation, and every unbeliever's heart tremble with the weight of eternity. What happened next in Jerusalem will change everything you thought you knew about Bible prophecy. By midday, as news of the dawn visitation spread across social media and international news networks, something unprecedented began to unfold. The mysterious figures who had entered the holy city weren't hiding. They weren't seeking anonymity. Instead, they positioned themselves at the most sacred sites in Jerusalem, and what they began to declare sent shockwaves throughout the religious world. I need you to understand the magnitude of what I'm about to tell you. These weren't ordinary preachers or religious fanatics making wild claims. Witnesses described beings who spoke with an authority that transcended human understanding. When they opened their mouths, their voices carried across distances that should have been impossible without amplification. Yet every word was crystal clear, penetrating not just the ears but the very souls of everyone who heard them. The first figure took his position at the western wall, that ancient remnant of Solomon's temple where countless prayers have been offered for nearly 2,000 years. Orthodox Jews who were there for their afternoon prayers suddenly found themselves face to face with someone who spoke Hebrew with a purity and power they had never heard before. He began declaring passages from the book of Daniel, specifically chapter 9, verse 24 through 27, the prophecy of the 70 weeks. But here's what made the religious leaders tremble. This figure wasn't just reciting the prophecy. He was explaining how every single detail had been fulfilled in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth. He calculated the exact years from the decree to restore Jerusalem until the coming of the Messiah. He showed how the prophecy of Messiah being cut off after 69 weeks pointed directly to the crucifixion. Can you imagine the shock on the faces of the rabbis and scholars who had studied these texts their entire lives, suddenly hearing them explained with a clarity and authority that left them speechless? Some fell to their knees weeping. Others covered their faces in confusion and fear. Because deep in their hearts, they knew they were hearing truths spoken with divine authority. Meanwhile, the second figure had taken his position at the southern steps of the Temple Mount, the very place where Jesus had taught during his earthly ministry. Crowds began gathering as word spread through the city that something extraordinary was happening. This messenger began to speak about the restoration of all things, about the kingdom of heaven breaking into human history, about the return of the King. But what he said next sent tremors through every government building and news organization in the world. He declared that the times of the Gentiles were coming to an end, that the fullness of the nations was nearly complete, that God was preparing to turn his attention back to his covenant people, Israel, in ways that would fulfill every remaining prophecy about the last days. The implications of these declarations began to spread like wildfire across the internet. Jewish communities worldwide started experiencing unprecedented spiritual stirrings. Rabbis who had never considered the possibility that Jesus could be their Messiah began pulling ancient manuscripts from their archives, cross-referencing the prophecies they had memorized since childhood. In synagogues from New York to Buenos Aires, from London to Sydney, emergency meetings were called. Religious leaders found themselves grappling with questions they had never allowed themselves to ask. What if the Christians had been right all along? What if their rejection of Jesus had been the great tragedy of Jewish history? What if the one they had been waiting for had already come? But the most stunning development came when both figures began to speak simultaneously, their voices somehow harmonizing despite standing miles apart in the city. They began reciting passages from Zechariah chapter 12, verse 10. "And I will pour on the house of David and on the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and supplication. Then they will look on me whom they pierced. Yes, they will mourn for him as one mourns for his only son, and grieve for him as one grieves for a firstborn." As these words echoed through Jerusalem, something supernatural began to happen. Jews who had gathered to hear these declarations started weeping uncontrollably. Not tears of sadness, but tears of recognition. Tears of understanding. It was as if scales were falling from their eyes, and for the first time in their lives, they were seeing Jesus not as the founder of a foreign religion, but as their own promised Messiah. The news reports coming out of Jerusalem became increasingly difficult for secular media to explain. How do you rationalize mass spiritual awakening? How do you document supernatural phenomena with cameras and microphones that seem inadequate to capture what's actually happening? International correspondents found themselves struggling to maintain their professional objectivity as they witnessed events that defied their understanding of reality. Some news anchors broke down on live television, unable to continue their reports as the weight of what they were witnessing overwhelmed their skepticism. Christian churches around the world began reporting similar phenomena. Pastors who had been preaching about the return of Christ for decades suddenly found their congregations on their knees, weeping and praying with an intensity they had never experienced. Phone lines at churches were flooded with calls from people desperate to understand what was happening and how they should respond. But perhaps the most significant development was happening in the hearts of individual Jewish people who had never given serious thought to Jesus Christ. Doctors, lawyers, teachers, business owners, young people, elderly Holocaust survivors, all across the spectrum of Jewish society, people began experiencing dreams and visions that they couldn't explain through natural means. These weren't vague spiritual experiences. They were detailed, specific encounters with someone they somehow knew was Jesus, but not the Jesus they had been taught to reject. This was Jesus as he truly is, the Jewish Messiah who had come to his own people first, who had fulfilled every messianic prophecy in the Hebrew Scriptures. Dr. Rachel Goldman, a prominent psychiatrist at Hadassah Medical Center, held an impromptu press conference that evening. With tears streaming down her face, she described a vision she had received while treating patients that afternoon. She saw Jesus weeping over Jerusalem, just as the Gospel of Luke describes, but in her vision, she understood for the first time that his tears were not tears of judgment, but tears of love for his people who had not recognized him. The ripple effects began spreading beyond Israel's borders at unprecedented speed. Jewish communities in major cities worldwide started organizing emergency assemblies. Rabbis who had spent their lives studying Talmud and Torah found themselves revisiting the 53rd chapter of Isaiah with new eyes. The suffering servant they had discussed in abstract theological terms suddenly took on the face of the crucified carpenter from Nazareth. In New York's Orthodox neighborhoods, in the Jewish quarter of Paris, in the synagogues of Buenos Aires, the same phenomenon was occurring. Ancient prayers for the coming of Messiah were taking on new meaning. The phrase, Baruch haba Bishem Adonai, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, was being whispered with trembling lips as realization dawned. But what about the rest of the world? What about Christians who had been praying for this day for generations? Churches that had been half empty on Sunday mornings suddenly couldn't contain the crowds. People who had been lukewarm in their faith found themselves on fire with passion for Jesus they had never experienced before. Prayer meetings that had been attended by a faithful few were now overflowing into streets and parking lots. Pastors were canceling their prepared sermons and simply opening their Bibles to the prophetic passages that were being fulfilled before their eyes. The book of Romans chapter 11, which speaks of Israel's spiritual blindness being temporary and their eventual restoration, was being read with tears of joy and amazement. Yet in the midst of this unprecedented spiritual awakening, the two witnesses in Jerusalem delivered a message that sent chills through the hearts of political leaders worldwide. They declared that the kingdoms of this world were about to become the kingdom of our Lord and of His Christ. They announced that systems of human government that had operated in rebellion against God's authority would not continue much longer. World leaders found themselves in emergency sessions, trying to understand how to respond to events that fell completely outside their experience and training. How do you negotiate with divine messengers? How do you control spiritual phenomena that recognize no national boundaries? The financial markets began reflecting the uncertainty and all that was gripping the world. Not panic selling, but a strange hesitation, as if traders and investors sensed that the economic systems they had built their lives around might not be as permanent as they had assumed. But for those who had placed their faith in Jesus Christ, a different kind of transformation was taking place. Believers who had struggled with doubt found their faith solidified in ways they never imagined possible. Christians who had been timid about sharing their faith suddenly discovered boldness they didn't know they possessed. The two witnesses concluded their first day of ministry as the sun set over Jerusalem, but their message continued echoing through the hearts of everyone who had heard them. They had declared that this was only the beginning. That greater signs and wonders were yet to come. That the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was about to demonstrate His power in ways that would leave no doubt about who is the true King of Kings. As darkness fell over the holy city, the sky that had appeared so frightening at dawn now seemed to pulse with anticipation. The heavens themselves seemed to be holding their breath, waiting for the next phase of God's prophetic timeline to unfold. Tonight, in homes across Israel and around the world, Jewish families are gathering around dinner tables having conversations they never thought they would have. Grandparents who survived the Holocaust are weeping as they realize that the Jesus their children embraced might actually be the Messiah they had prayed for their entire lives. Christian families are staying up late into the night, reading their Bibles with fresh eyes, realizing that the return of Christ they had hoped for might be closer than they ever dared to believe. Children are asking questions that their parents are struggling to answer because the magnitude of what's happening is beyond human comprehension. This is not the end of the story. This is the beginning of the final chapter. Tomorrow, the two witnesses will continue their testimony. Tomorrow, more scales will fall from more eyes. Tomorrow, more hearts will be open to the truth that Jesus Christ is Lord of all. But tonight, as you process everything you've learned, I want to ask you the most important question you will ever face. What will you do with Jesus? Will you continue to ignore the signs that are multiplying around you? Will you dismiss the testimonies of thousands who are experiencing supernatural encounters with the living God? Or will you humble yourself before the one who created you, who loves you, who died for you, and who is coming again in power and great glory? Because make no mistake about it, what happened in Jerusalem today is just a preview of what's coming for the entire world. The sky was scary this morning because heaven was announcing that the age of human rebellion against divine authority is coming to an end. The mysterious figures who entered the holy city at dawn came as heralds of the king who is returning to claim his throne. And you need to decide right now whether you will welcome him as Savior and Lord, or face him as Judge when he comes. Because he is coming. The events in Jerusalem today have made that more certain than ever before. Subscribe to this channel if you want to stay informed about what's happening in these prophetic times. Share this message with everyone you know because they need to understand what's at stake. And leave a comment below telling me how God is speaking to your heart through these incredible events. But most importantly, don't wait another day to surrender your life completely to Jesus Christ. Because the next time mysterious figures appear in Jerusalem, it might not be messengers preparing the way. It might be the King himself, returning to establish his kingdom on earth. And when that day comes, it will be too late to change your mind about who Jesus really is.